Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Marina Young, and I'm so excited today to be talking to Rob Kenner, New York Times best-selling author of The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. I will tell you that so pleased that I can share this information with you because as Rob is going to tell us, that Nipsey was more than a rapper. This was a young man that was instrumental in a lot of things, building up his community and giving back. So Rob is going to expand on our knowledge of both hip hop and Nipsey's life and legacy. But I want to admit that I did not know of Nipsey Hussle until he was murdered. And then the whole world was talking about it. And then I was introduced to him because my generation is not necessarily a rap or a hip hop kind of generation. You know, I'm with the R&B soul generation. So but Rob, on the other hand, is intimately connected with hip hop and its culture, and we will discuss hip hop as well as explore the life and times of Nipsey. So, welcome again, Rob.
Thank you for having me, Myrna. It's great to be on your show.
Yes, yes, great to have you too. All right, well, let me give our listeners and those watching on TV a short bio of Rob. Rob Kenner is one of the most prolific and influential voices in hip hop publishing. A founding editor of Vibe, Kenner joined the startup team of Quincy Jones' groundbreaking hip hop monthly in 1992. During a 19-year run at Vibe, he edited and wrote cover and feature stories on iconic cultural figures ranging from Tupac Shakur to Barack Obama, as well as writing the acclaimed column Boom Shots. Kenner's writing has appeared in Complex, Genius, Mass Appeal, Pigeons and Planes, Ego Trip, Poetry Magazine, The New York Times, and Billboard. He's also produced and directed documentary shorts on the likes of De La Soul, Nas, and Post Malone. As an author at Vibe Books, Kenner worked on the New York Times bestseller Tupac Shakur and contributed to the Vibe history of hip hop. He went on to co author VX, 10 Years of Vibe Photography, and produced the book Unbelievable, a biography of Notorious B.I.G. by Chio Hodari Coker, which was optioned for the motion picture Notorious. Wow. You've done some important work, Rob.
Thanks for
Yes.
running all through it. I appreciate you highlighting all of it.
Well, I had to. I mean, you are definitely a special guest, and I definitely want to, you know, to uplift you and tell our audience that they're listening now to a world-renowned journalist and author. You've been on the New York best-selling author for several different times. Now, I was reading your press releases. I understand that you met Nipsey Hussle about 10 years ago at Vibe. And so I want to start off by asking you, what impressed you most about the man back then? Of course, he wasn't, I don't think he was called Nipsey Hussle back then, right? He had his original name.
He actually had started rapping as
Okay.
Nipsey Hussle by that point,
Okay.
but it was even a bit longer than 10 years ago. That was 2009, and
Mm.
Nipsey had just released one of his first major mixtapes, project called Bullets Ain't Got No Name.
Mm.
And he was very excited to come up to the office of Vibe magazine and present it to the staff. As I learned later in the process of researching my book, The Marathon Don't Stop, he had been submitting his demo and photo to the magazine for some time and hoping to be featured in our next section, which is a platform for new artists, people like Jay-Z and Biggie and Mary J. Blige got their first page in Vibe in the next
Wow.
section. That
Wow.
was Nipsey's goal to be featured in that section. Honestly, where he was in his career at that moment, he was not really on our radar yet. He
Mm,
was an unsigned artist when he was first sending those demos in. But like every goal he ever set for himself in life, he set a very high goal. And although he did not achieve his goal right away, he persisted and kept at it and did not give up. And by God, he made it into the Office of Vibe by 2009 and presented his mixtape to the staff. So I was just impressed by his charisma, his energy, his personal magnetism, if I could call it that. He just had
okay.
something about him that everyone who was in the conference room that day remembers that young man who walked in with his braids immaculately done and his outfit on point, his gold chain was shining, and he was very proud to be presenting his music. And
Wow.
when he pressed play, it was powerful stuff.
Mm,
We had worked on the first cover story for Snoop Dogg back in 1993. And so I personally had a strong sense of deja vu. Because Nipsey was coming from
mm,
Los Angeles and giving that really hard West Coast sound. And actually, one of the tracks on the tape, he was rapping over a famous Dr. Dre beat, the song "Gin and Juice" that Snoop was, well known for. So
yeah.
hearing someone go over that beat, you have to come correct. You can't just mess around on that
Right, right,
particular
right.
beat.
Mm-hmm.
But Nipsey really brought it, and that was very impressive to me. So after he played all of his music, I took him aside and I said, keep doing what you're doing. We're going to give you all the strength that we can. And in fact, he did get his one-page write-up in Vibe shortly before the magazine folded or ceased print publication. Anyway, it became
Mm,
a digital
right.
publication.
Online, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he got his page in the magazine, and would go on to greater things. But I just kept watching him. I was listening out for
Hmm.
what he was doing because I was so impressed by that initial impression. And over time, everything he did was special. He was just doing things differently and changing the game in terms of his business strategy. And as I would learn later, his commitment to his community and to all of the people that were helping him build his movement. So yeah, that was the first impression, and it definitely you know stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, I listened to some of his music before I talked to you, and I was very impressed by his words as well as the music of itself was pretty good. I actually listened to Motivate and Hustle,
Yeah,
and it had it had 63 million views. So, I mean, people love him, and people love what he was trying to do.
yeah.
But in your book, you didn't necessarily write the book because of his because of the artist, right? You wrote it because of the man and what he represented. So can you tell us why you wrote the book? And I know that a couple of his tapes were, one was the marathon, and then the second one was the marathon don't stop. So what does that really mean? And why did you
Sure.
choose it as the title of your book?
Sure. So, just to back up, the mixtape titles were the Marathon and the Marathon Continues, and
Okay.
Marathon Continues is kind of a motto for his fans, especially after his tragic passing. Just kind of a
Mm,
rallying cry to make sure that all of the things that Nipsey stands for continue, all of the
okay.
principles that he advocated in his music and in his interviews and in his daily life and his work, which have to do with self empowerment, economic independence, owning your own intellectual property, owning, real estate,
Mm,
investing, financial literacy,
mm,
and then also just supporting people who support you, and really, a spirit of kind of collective upliftment. And I think, that is such an important principle in times like these, and, certainly during Nipsey's life as well. But
Mm,
the reason that I wrote the book, and why I called it The Marathon Don't Stop, is that I believe that Nipsey Hussle is one of the most important and misunderstood artists in the history of hip hop. And
mm,
more than that, as you mentioned, he is a businessman, an entrepreneur, and a leader and an activist. He really identified strongly with civil rights leaders.
mm,
In the latest song, which was released, after his passing, it's a track called "What It Feels Like," which is featuring Jay-Z and Nipsey Hussle on the same track.
mm.
It was part of the soundtrack to the film Judas and the Black Messiah, if you caught that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, there was an album
Mm,
inspired by that movie, and that was kind
mm,
of like one of the key featured tracks off there. Nipsey refers to himself as Young Malcolm, and he
mm.
wore a Malcolm X pendant, which his brother had made custom for himself, and then let Nipsey keep when his brother was going away to prison for a little while.
Okay.
But then Nipsey wore it proudly, throughout many performances and videos. And I think there was a reason behind that. He saw himself as much more than an entertainer. He was
Mm,
someone committed to the upliftment and, the full respect of his community. And I think that is one of the reasons why this book was so important. You
mm-hmm.
are not the only person who's told me that you were unaware of what he was doing until, the Staples Center Memorial, where
Yeah.
21,000 people were all
Yeah.
on their feet, mourning him and celebrating his life. Um, President Obama wrote him a letter of tribute for that ceremony. Stevie Wonder sang at the
That's
funeral,
beautiful.
or at the memorial. Snoop Dogg eulogized him, and of course, his beloved Lauren London delivered a very moving tribute as well. So,
Mm,
a lot of people just weren't aware, because Nipsey was not interested really in being the most famous rapper. He wasn't
mm.
chasing celebrity status at all. He
Okay.
was mostly interested in building a movement, starting in his own family and then his community. And he had a family-owned business which was called All Money and No Money Out Records. He and his
Mm,
brother also had a successful clothing store called the Marathon Clothing, which
mm,
they built right in the same shopping plaza where he used to sell his mixtapes hand to hand, right there on Slauson and Crenshaw. He
mm.
always talks about that intersection in his music. And
Yeah, I saw he's got a title called Crenshaw, right? Hmm.
right,
Wow.
Crenshaw, that
Mm-hmm.
was a really groundbreaking mixtape. The
Mm-hmm.
Crenshaw project, I would say, for the rap industry, that was the moment that if you weren't paying attention to Nipsey Hussle,
Mm.
everybody woke up at that moment, because he
Okay.
had the ambitious idea of selling his mixtape for $100 a copy for a physical CD. And this was at a time when you could not get people to pay anything for music. They were downloading everything for
For
free.
free. Right, right. Mm-hmm.
The internet had completely changed the business model. And he talked about that in our interview, that, his career was just taking off when Napster and MP3s and that whole technological wave hit the music industry, and it completely shook everyone, from a business standpoint. So
Yeah.
he compared it to like an airplane taking off, and you have to fix the plane in midair just as it's about to,
Wow.
lift off from
That's a really good analogy. Yep.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So
Yes.
that's
Mm-hmm.
what he had to do. And he was a very smart young man. He was really a genius, honestly. He was able to build computers from parts just by reading articles
Wow.
in magazines. He was very astute about social networks and digital technology. He was early on Napster, which was the site where college kids were trading MP3s and downloading them
Mm,
for free. So
mm-hmm.
he understood that he had to give his music away for free. And that was fine with him. He was building an audience, and he would also, sell merchandise. He would do live shows, and he had a strategy where he was going to go state by state, and he had a plan to make you know a specific goal of income based on earning a specific number of fans in each state, and he had it
Wow.
all figured out of how much he could
Wow.
start a show
A
and
great
how
businessman.
Oh,
Yep.
absolutely. He wrote all his
Mm-hmm.
goals down. He had
Hmm.
whiteboards in every office and
Wow.
bookshelves filled with books. Just a very organized and focused person. So, anyway, the Crenshaw tape, by that point, he had put out a few free mixtapes and built up quite a loyal fan base. The Crenshaw actually came after the Marathon tape, and
Oh,
Marathon continues. So, those
okay.
tapes expressed his vision of the Marathon, which was a long term view, just viewing life
Mm.
as a marathon and not,
Okay. Got you.
and
Yep.
the idea
Mm-hmm.
that you don't give up just because you're behind in the first lap. You have to stay
Right.
strong.
Right.
I say in the book that the marathon is not a team sport. Other people can be cheering for you, you can practice together, but nobody else can run your
Only
lap.
you. Yeah. You. Only you're running with the baton. Right. Okay.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm. All
exactly.
right.
So,
Hmm.
Nipsey understood that, and he used that concept of the marathon really to encourage himself when he was down, when there were setbacks in his path, and there were quite a few, which we
Mm.
get into in the book in detail. But
Okay.
he withstood tremendous pressure from a neighborhood that was extremely volatile. There was a very hostile relationship between the police and the members of the community. There was a strong gang culture, which Nipsey eventually became involved in.
Mm.
And his life was filled with challenges. And
Yeah.
he was someone that had unlimited potential, but huge obstacles, seemingly
Wow.
unsurmountable obstacles.
His
And
community, even though that's probably why he was trying to build it, because the community where he lived in had all those obstacles, and he wanted more, and that's basically what his goal was, and what drove him, because he wanted to build it back up. And it's unfortunate that we're not writing this autobiography um uh, when he's completed all those, you know what I mean.
right,
Somebody took his life in mid sentence, so
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the hardest parts about all this is when you think about what might have been.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you mentioned, you never really heard of him until that
Right, right,
moment.
right,
And
right,
I
right.
think that there was an explosion of interest in
Yeah.
his work and the work he was carrying on. Of course, that won't fill the gap in the heart, the hole in the heart
Right,
of his
right, right.
family and his loved ones.
Yeah.
But in terms of people paying attention to his work and what he stood for and the principles that he lived by, I think that that is why the book is called The Marathon Don't Stop, because
Right.
Nipsey Hussle's movement, it has not stopped. He has been a steady presence in all the conversations about race in America. His face has
Mhm.
been on murals all around the world. His music was streamed millions of times on election day 2020. He had a very
It's
important
beautiful.
song which he and YG, a friend of his from another neighborhood in Los Angeles, made a song called FDT. And I'm not sure if you listened to that one, but the
No.
initials are um, a rebuke of President Donald Trump. You can probably figure out what the
Ah,
F
I think I
stands.
heard that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. I didn't really hear it, but I saw it when I was going through the titles. Right.
Right. So,
Hmm.
Nipsey and YG recognized that was running on a very divisive platform. That although Trump was actually friends with a lot of rappers during his days in New York as kind of a real estate tycoon. I think his name was just equated with success, and so people like to hang around with him and party and whatever. But when he got into public life, it became clear that he was trying to demonize Mexican Americans, that he was throwing black students out of his rallies, that he was endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, and therefore, there was a threat to the way of life that we had gotten used to under 8 years of Barack Obama. Certainly, when I was at Vibe was the first national magazine to endorse Barack Obama for president, and hip hop, I believe, helped to uh, mobilize the vote, which brought President Obama into office. But after 8 years of Obama, Donald Trump was presenting kind of a backlash, and definitely playing on racial divisions. And I think YG and Nipsey Hussle were very important in that they recognized that, and they organized a response from the hip hop culture, which was to make that song FDT. And although it didn't prevent Donald Trump from being elected, it did stream, as I mentioned, millions of times on election day 2020. And I believe it helped mobilize the vote in what turned out to be a pretty close election in some states. So, we have him to thank for that. I think Nipsey deserves credit, and YG as well, for recognizing the power of hip hop to speak to the moment in terms of social and political issues. Um, Now we were talking about the Crenshaw tape, and I just want to mention when he decided to put out that tape and sell it for $100 for a physical CD. His concept was mocked. He was called crazy. The music was available for free download anyway, and for some reason, uh, he believed that his fans would spend that kind of money just to support him. And he firmly believed it, but people in the blog sphere and even some radio stations in LA, were making fun of the idea. Well, as it turned out, they sold $100,000 worth of CDs the first night. $10,000 were wired by Jay-Z to get 100 copies of the CD. Um, and it just proved, at that moment, that Nipsey Hussle was ahead of his time. He understood how to market music and how to build a relationship with his audience. One of his brilliant ideas with this CD was to bundle it with tickets to a live performance, which would only be for the core fans. That was his one of his key principles, was not to try to be known to everybody, but just to find out the people who really loved him and who really supported what he was about and serve them. And so they supported him very strongly. And this idea of bundling your CD with tickets to a future concert for VIP fans has now been borrowed and emulated by the rest of the music industry. Artists like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift now use that same strategy. They call it a bundle. And it's an idea that was originated by Nipsey Hussle. So, he's just one of these people who was ahead of his time and doing things that no one had ever thought to do. And it's important that he be credited for that, and also that the ideas that he advocated, continue.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Wow. So, you also make a comparison between Nipsey and Tupac Shakur. Can you? I know they were both, cut down in when they were supposed to go on to do remarkable things. It's just absolutely amazing. But then, because they were so good and because they were almost martyrs, we still talk about them over and over again to get is their legacy continues. So what is the similarities between those two?
Well, I wasn't the first one to compare Nipsey to Tupac. He actually called himself Tupac of my generation, and that was
Oh,
on that
I
was
think
on
I saw that. Right. Mm-hmm.
that was on the album that you were listening to, Victory Lap, which was his major label debut. He actually only released one album on a major label, and that was 2018's Victory Lap. Soon after that album was released, he came to New York to do a press run, and that's when I did my last, in my really biggest in-depth interview with him. And of course, I asked him about that line in the song because that's a big statement. I said, "You're calling yourself the Tupac of your generation. What do you mean by that? Tupac means so many things to different people." And he said, "Well, I know it's a big statement, but to me, Tupac was a Trojan horse for the streets. He had so much more going on inside of him than his thug life image would suggest. And he was actually a very intelligent and sensitive person with a lot of different talents and qualities that he didn't necessarily present at all times. And what
Yeah,
Nipsey,
he also probably had the same kind of background because I understand that Tupac's mother was part of the Black Panther. And so, they're both have this innate, maybe, going towards the Black movement or the Black Power
Mhm.
movement, or enabling Black people to be better than
No,
what they're getting. Right.
I absolutely agree. Actually, Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, passed away 5 years ago yesterday. We're taping this on
Oh,
Cinco de
really?
Mayo, 5th of
Oh,
May.
wow.
She passed away on the 4th of May 5 years ago. And she was indeed a member of the Black Panther Party, and remained dedicated to issues of just saving Black lives. Before Black Lives Matter was a slogan, before
Okay.
Twitter was even invented, she was committed to the preservation of Black lives and the improvement of racial disparities in this country. I mean, there's that's a big part of my book actually. The Marathon Don't Stop. I try to place Nipsey in the context of American history and LA history and hip hop history because he was also the son of an African freedom fighter. His father, Dawit Askedom, had been a part of a struggle in his native country of Eritrea in East Africa, which has had a long-running dispute with Ethiopia, which formerly Eritrea was part of Ethiopia, and the people of the two countries actually seem very similar culturally and in terms of everything, their appearance, their lifestyle in many ways, but due to colonial forces and divisions that go back for decades, there has been a long and tragic civil war there. So Dawit Askedom was a teenager when he left Africa and moved to Los Angeles, seeking asylum from that struggle. And his son always proudly referred to him as an African freedom fighter. So both Nipsey and Pac had that kind of struggle, in their blood, if you will. But I think for Nipsey, what he was relating to was this idea that what he told me was in our culture, street culture, being intelligent is sometimes looked on as a form of weakness. And so you don't want to show too much of your intelligence because you may put people off or have them think you're soft or something like that. So, in order to involve everybody in whatever movement you're trying to build, you don't necessarily show off every bit of your intelligence. And
Right.
Nipsey said that he could identify with that. And so I thought that was interesting that that was the parallel that he saw with Tupac. He certainly wasn't thinking about being, having his life cut short at an early age.
No, of course not.
And,
Right. Who thinks
and
that? Right.
no, exactly. And Nipsey actually, lived longer than Tupac. Tupac died at
Yeah, because he was
uh,
33. Right.
right.
Tupac was what, in his early 20s?
He was 25 when he was killed.
25. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So, there's an interview where Tupac says, "I may not change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the mind of the person who does." And I believe that one of the minds that Tupac sparked was young Aramis Ascadon, who would go on to be known as Nipsey Hussle. So
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. That's really
there's a lot
sad.
of parallels there.
Now, it's really interesting. We're just talking about all these rappers or artists that were cut short early. But you also have a book about the notorious B.I.G., which is another person that was destined to do great things, but again, he was cut down by violence. We were talking about Malcolm X, we're talking about Nipsey, we're talking about Tupac, we're talking about Notorious B.I.G. Why is it that we can't live a full life and complete our our purpose on this earth without somebody taking a gun and shooting us down?
But that's a very powerful question that you ask, and there's a lot of answers to it, but no one has found a solution. I think we can talk about it all day, but I was speaking with someone in Chicago. Tone Capone is a radio DJ in WGCI in Chicago recently, and Chicago's going through a terrible year of violence, and they have for several years, but this year is particularly bad. And there's lots of reasons. The schools have been shut down due to COVID, and um, the gang culture has been, you know, deep rooted in that city for a long time, and
Yeah,
there's just too many guns everywhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
One of the things that I said in the interview was, when you're speaking to your audience in Chicago, maybe ask them, like, what would Nipsey Hussle do before you go pull that trigger? Think about, like, someone who came from the same kind of struggle that you may be going through, who made a decision to put the gangbanging down and elevate himself through business and through art and through, collective empowerment. And these are the issues that this country has been struggling with for a long time. Why are there so many guns in the streets? Why is gun lust the American national pastime?
yeah,
I mean, we have so much more homicide by firearms than any other country in the world, and we defend this right to bear arms and the Constitution, and the gun lobby has so much power. Every time there's a mass shooting, people try to organize and you know just limit access to firearms a little bit, not ban them completely, but just not make it
yeah.
like driving through and ordering a
My
hamburger.
opinion is that they don't value their lives. They don't value anyone else's lives. Your life doesn't seem to, mean anything
Right.
in that culture.
Well,
Yeah,
I have a friend who lives in London, grew up in London, and she tells me that every time you go to the pub in London, it's not uncommon for a fist fight to break out, and people will, go on and beat the heck out of each other, and then the next day they're all at the pub again drinking. And it's different when you have firearms all over the place. It's
yeah,
these
yeah.
temporary
And now that
disputes.
I think about it, was Nipsey just was murdered for the same thing? A stupid argument, and somebody went and got a gun and shot him?
Well, I yeah, that is officially what we have. That's what we know. We don't know why that person was there that day. We don't know why they had the gun. We don't know why they came in just when Nipsey was there at that moment. There's a lot of things that will probably never be answered about what
Okay.
happened. And I very carefully do not try to solve the murder, honestly, in the book. That was never the focus of the book. This is a book about a triumph rather than a tragedy.
Right,
And
right. Okay.
I want to focus on the message and the movement and the marathon rather than this atrocity that took place. But
Right,
yes, it is an
right.
issue that has to be addressed. And there is a kind of nihilism and certainly a lack of respect for life. Biggie Smalls, as you mentioned, is another example of a life that could have blossomed into so much more than the brief time he was on earth, the brilliant work he was doing. We're going to talk about these guys forever. um, so it is absolutely outrageous that so many geniuses have been snuffed out, and then other people who are just living their lives and being part of their family and
Yeah,
making
yeah,
their way.
yeah, yeah.
um,
Yeah,
it's
it's a terrible legacy. But I want to talk about hip hop because, like I mentioned, I had to do some research before this interview to understand what it really is. So I know that you're intimately connected with this, and rapping is maybe probably a little different, but hip hop. But why has hip hop um, become this lifestyle and culture of the young generation? It is not even a race thing because it's not only to the African Americans. It encompasses everybody. Even again, Justin Bieber can be called a hip hop artist, and all the others, right? I
Well, I
think.
think that's debatable about Justin Bieber, but I think that yeah, there is a certainly uh, we're actually coming up on the 50th anniversary of what is considered the birth of hip hop, which was
Okay.
people say there was a party in the Bronx in 1973 where DJ Kool Herc and his sister Cindy Campbell threw a back to school party. Their parents
Okay.
were there. I just recently was part of an amazing conversation with Kool Herc and Cindy and two of my fellow hip hop journalists, Jeff Chang and Davey D. And we were just talking about the birth of hip hop in New York. So it's an interesting question that you bring up. Um, in this conversation, which was, just a few days ago, the Kool Herc and his sister were both emphasizing, our parents were at the party. And if you came to start any nonsense, you were going to be asked to leave. You were going to, have to act right to be at their hip hop party. So, hip hop was not ever about negative forces or anything like that. It was, but to the contrary, it was a way to escape the struggles of life in the Bronx at a time when
Mm.
Bronx was a real, the Bronx was burning literally. It was a urban wasteland. And hip hop grew and evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry. It affects every aspect of pop culture, from fashion to language to you know politics, marketing, business. Everything now is influenced by hip hop. And I believe that you mentioned I was at Vibe magazine. My OG in this whole music journalism thing is Quincy Jones, who founded Vibe
Yeah,
magazine.
good old Quincy. Forgot
Yeah,
him. Right. But
Quincy
I'm
Quincy
thinking of
Five.
Quincy as R&B and Motown. So yes.
Well, if you were to ask Quincy, he would say, and I've heard him say many times, that as a jazz artist, he understood the bebop generation as the coolest thing that had hit music ever at that moment. And when he saw hip hop artists in their earliest stages of the development of that culture, he recognized a kindred spirit there,
Mm, okay.
So it's really just it's the next evolution of black cool, you could say, although as you mentioned, it's become multiracial and multicultural. In the early days in the Bronx, it's important to remember that there were all kinds of kids involved, a lot of Puerto Rican, Dominican kids dancing, breakdancing, painting graffiti. So hip hop is a lifestyle. It's not
Hmm.
just rap music, which is one aspect of it, the DJ and the MC, or the components of rap music. But then you have, as I said, breakdancing, graffiti. So there's multiple aspects to hip hop, and it's become the most powerful and popular form of entertainment in the world. That
Yeah,
is,
I agree. I
yeah.
absolutely definitely agree. Yep. Very, very powerful medium. Right. Okay.
But it's important to remember,
So
for Kool Herc and all the way up to Nipsey Hussle, the music, although we talk about how dangerous it can be to be a successful rapper and how many have tragically met with violent, ends. um, the music is a way out of those problems. It's not the cause of the problem, and it's not a social problem in itself, which I think a lot of cultural critics try to do. They try to blame the music, blame the messenger. And, Nipsey Hussle loved hip hop. And from a little kid, when he was 7 years old, Chris Cross put out that song Jump. Those the two boys from Atlanta had us,
Right, right,
young
right.
teens.
Yes,
And
crisscross, right?
Nipsey saw that, and he wanted to do that. Like he was determined to be a rap star from the time he was a little kid. And long before any of the street life got into his way, hip hop was really the guiding light and an economic opportunity. And that's what he was determined to do, is to leverage the power of hip hop and the commercial opportunities to better himself, to better his community, to uplift his family and everyone that he cared about. So I want to make sure that that gets said, because very often the mass media labels hip hop as like something that causes problems, and it's exactly the opposite.
No, I mean, you can talk about the lyrics sometimes and whatever, but you're right. When somebody listens to it, they're transported, because that's what music does. It's something that moves you, that elevates your mood, and it's there for a purpose, and that's why people listen to it, and that's why people will buy it, because it elevates your mood. Any kind of music,
Expresses your feelings, which can be
yeah,
frustration, or it can be inspiration, it can be
yeah.
specific information. There's records where Nipsey talks about specific police officers that harassed him in his
Yeah.
neighborhood, and describes them physically and drops their names subtly in the song. It's almost like a coded
Yeah, yeah,
warning.
we're still working on that. I think we've turned a corner on that, though, with George Floyd, but it's been going on for years. We've just turned a corner. But yeah, as a Black man, you can't just, you're always been harassed, so
And
it's
if you
great
know
that
that
Nipsey, yeah,
if you know that this one guy with a certain haircut and his name is this on his badge, if you see him, if he pulls you over and you heard about it in Nipsey's song, you better be on your toes. So it's just things like that. Hip hop is very powerful and subtle language that, it permeates every aspect of life.
that's beautiful. All right. So as we wrap up, you know, um, uh, tell our listeners about, how they can get your book. Everybody knows you can get it on Amazon. You also still have the digital Vibe, because I went on it and your name is all over it with all your videos. So tell us what that is. I mean, it started off as a magazine. What do you guys do now there at Vibe?
Well, Vibe, as we mentioned, was founded by Quincy Jones back in 1992. I joined the startup staff in 93. But that first year, we just put out one issue. So I wrote an article in that issue, and Time Inc., which is obviously a major media corporation, was deciding whether they were going to back this publication or not. And after the first issue sold well, they said, "Oh yeah, Quincy had a good idea. We should do this." And so I ended up working at Vibe for 17 years. I was the only editor who started from the startup staff and stayed all the way until the very last day when the magazine had to be shut down. Quincy had moved on, and the ownership had changed hands, and you know, it's a long story, but the bank basically repossessed
Mm,
the investment. So,
okay.
but the website, the digital version of Vibe, has gone on because it's a very important publication. I think Vibe became the the definitive publication for hip hop culture in terms of excellent
Okay.
photography, excellent journalism. We had some of the most talented writers and photographers of this generation working at the magazine, and it has gone on because it needs to go on. It still holds up a standard of excellence in terms of discussing all the aspects of hip hop culture, lifestyle, etc. So Vibe.com is going strong. It's actually under new ownership, and uh, you know, in the midst of a growth spurt right now. So Vibe is going strong. And when you mention about the book, I just want to add, you can go online and buy, and I hope people get their hands on a copy of The Marathon Don't Stop. But if you can, please support your local bookstores, because the pandemic has been really hard on them, and they are an important part of the whole culture. People go on Google and look things up that they already know about, but when you go to a bookstore, you discover things you've never heard of, and that is a completely different experience. And there's social meeting place, and you can get a cup of coffee and, listen to some cool music while you're browsing the shelves. So I want to really encourage people to support local bookstores, and, but by all means, even if you just go to the library and check out The Marathon Don't Stop, I hope that people read it. I believe that Nipsey Hussle's message is one that the world needs right now. As you mentioned, we've gone through the madness of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and Adam Toledo just the other day in Chicago, and the list of names never stops. And I think it has to do with a lot of issues, as we mentioned, but you know one of those issues is self empowerment, coming together, valuing each other's thoughts and lives and contributions, and also creating economic opportunities so people aren't in such pressurized situations, and having businesses that are family owned, that are Black owned, that are owned by people of color, just people who are independent and open minded. I think that is the key. And Nipsey Hussle, we haven't even touched on all the technology stuff he was doing. He opened a STEM learning center in his neighborhood where he was encouraging people to learn science and technology and engineering so that they could get jobs in the tech industry and elevate and the jobs of tomorrow. Like, everyone's talking now about cryptocurrency and blockchain. Nipsey Hussle was on that way
Yeah,
before.
I saw that. Yeah, that he talked about that years ago. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, he's obviously a brilliant guy. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I would love to know that the movement that he started and the ideas that he has championed will be carried on. And I've already heard people starting book discussion groups to read The Marathon Don't Stop. I've heard people reaching out from every continent of the planet talking about how they're reading the book. Someone in Africa, who was actually in Nairobi, Kenya, was saying, I'm reading the book, and I just want you to know that people in this city not only love Nipsey's music, but they are following his business ideas and starting their own businesses, and directly identifying with him as an inspiration. So, I mean, his wave is worldwide. And, I that's why I felt an obligation to write this book. It's very nice to be able to talk with you about it, because I love speaking with people who are still learning about him, and I feel like we're spreading the word, and it's very important. So thank you for this opportunity today, Myrna.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for what you are doing for, all the artists, for Nipsey's name and Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. and what you do at Vibe. You're uplifting these, there's two ways that most of the young Black boys dream. They dream of becoming a rapper, or they dream of being in the NFL, or something, so thank you for continuing that inspiration. Know that it's not where you start out, but where you end up. And if you use the brain power that you have, you can find your niche, and go on to do great things. I know your book is a New York Times bestselling author, so it's out there, it's visible, it's people are reading it. And I'm going to do my part to help promote it. And thank you for saying that. People purchasing the book is going to help Black businesses, and extend the culture. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would just add, as you said, sports and music are often, seen as a way to elevate yourself.
yeah,
Nipsey started Vector 90, his shared workspace and STEM learning center, because he wanted ways to learn about technology when he was a kid. He was building computers when he was in high school out of parts, and he told me when I interviewed him that if I had had access to a STEM learning center when I was a kid, my whole life trajectory might have been completely different. So, there are more paths to success than sports and music,
I
which are
know.
both
Right.
very long shots, honestly, of all the
Yeah, I
aspiring
know. But I'm saying
athletes.
that's what the kids dream about. We know
Right.
that it's a 1% chance.
Right. All the athletes and all the musicians, a very small percent ever really see success. And even those who do sometimes tragically get caught up. Just last week, I think just yesterday, I believe, my my sister is an educator in Chicago, Lisa Kenner, and two of her students who are both bound for very promising basketball careers and NCAA Division One schools were caught up in a drive-by shooting in Chicago, and they're
Aw,
okay, but they were both
wow.
wounded, and it's just there has to be more solutions. There has to be more answers, and I think Nipsey Hussle was searching for those solutions, and that's why he's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Well, hey, the marathon continues, right?
That
So I like that because we all know that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And, as like Black Lives Matter, it is a marathon. It's started a long time ago, you know, uh, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, yeah, the Black Panther guy, I don't remember his name now. We're all, we're
Sojourner
not,
Truth, and yeah, all the way through, all the way
right,
through.
right. But we're all running this marathon. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Lives. What you're doing is transforming our lives, our minds. That you know you can be an artist, but you can also be an inspiration. You can be a motivational person, and you can show the young people that are looking up to you that there's a way out of, maybe being in a bad neighborhood in Los Angeles or Chicago or wherever there's poverty and there's gangs and all these bad things. There's a way out. You don't have to
I
stick.
think
You
I
don't have to
think
stay there.
you definitely do not, and it does. Your title of your show is perfect because it
Thank
is
you.
about transforming your mind. It's about
Yeah.
thinking differently, and I think
Yep.
that is a perfect analogy for what Nipsey Hussle's whole mindset was. He transformed his mind. He did not allow the obstacles in his path to define his
Right.
destiny,
Exactly.
and he
Exactly.
overcame
I
them.
love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Rob. I know you've got a hard stop. So
Okay.
thank you once again for coming on and sharing the life of times of Nipsey Hustle, and that the marathon doesn't stop. The marathon of what we want to do in this country, to take our place at the head of the table and not at the tail, and to encourage everybody to transform your mind, to transform your life. Um, uh, my listeners know that they can get a transcript of our conversation on the show page, which is blog.myhelps.us. Would also have links to Rob's book, and also links to vibe.com. So thanks again, Rob. Thank you guys all for watching and tuning in. Blessings to everyone, and until next time, namaste.
Thank you, Myrna. God bless.
Welcome.